I believe there is no liturgy in the world, either in ancient or modern language, which breathes more of a solid, scriptural, rational piety than the common prayer of the Church of England. And though the main of it was compiled considerably more than 200 years ago, yet is the language of it not only pure but strong and elegant in the highest degree. John Wesley, Bristol, September 9, 1784. Hello again. If I'm releasing this video as planned, it should be the first Sunday in Advent, and I thought this would be a good time to start a series of videos that I'd been thinking of doing for some time, looking at the prayer book of the Church of England, the Book of Common Prayer, in its various permutations over the years. I have a growing collection of prayer books from the Anglican Communion, and want to spend some time during these next few weeks looking at them, comparing, seeing the development from the beginnings in 1549, or actually centuries before that, even millennium before that, up to the present day. The little blurb with which I started is from this wonderful book, John Wesley's Prayer Book, The Sunday Service of the Methodists in North America, which was John Wesley's 1784 contribution to prayer book worship in the New World, at a time when the colonies had recently separated from England and English rule, and in doing so separated themselves from the head of the Church of England, because of course the King of England was, and the monarch in England continues to be, the head of the Anglican Church, which was not going to work in a new nation recently having won its independence from England, but not yet having established a new government. So John Wesley, not wanting to leave his fellow believers in America without access to the prayer book that they had become accustomed to worshiping through, produced this abridgment, this revision of the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. And this is one of the prayer books that we'll be covering in the next several weeks. I'm not going to begin with this book because it falls somewhere in the middle of the chain of events that brought us to the present prayer book. But I wanted to start with that because, as a Nazarene, I consider John Wesley as a founder in our denomination, as do the Methodists and the Wesleyans and many other offshoots. We look to John and Charles Wesley as founders, and they're at the birth of, I guess, our denomination. So that quote about the beauty and the scriptural foundation and the rational piety of the prayer book really speaks to me, and there's kind of a saying among Nazarenes that if it's good enough for John Wesley, it's good enough for me. So we won't be starting looking at this book, but I wanted to start with that quote for that reason. To sort of guide us through these next several videos over the next few weeks of Advent, I'm going to be relying on this little paperback I picked up at my local thrift for 50 cents back in August. Journey Through the Book of Common Prayer by Charles E. Fritz. This was written before the latest revision in the Episcopal prayer book of 1979. This is copyright 1959, so the prayer book that this is discussing is the 1928, which, as it turns out, is my preferred prayer book version, the one I use most frequently, and the first prayer book I owned. So I'll be using this to guide me through some of the history of the prayer book, and just as kind of a basic guide to the structure and use of the prayer book. So that will be my textbook, I guess, for the next several videos. So I plan to release this series of videos in Advent because, of course, with the Christian calendar and the church calendar, Advent is the time when you move your ribbons back to the beginning again. It's first Sunday in Advent is New Year's Day for the church. So you would begin again in the cycle of readings. The one I'm looking at here, fumbling with, is the 1979 prayer book, which is not my favorite and has its own issues, but still has a lot of beauty in it anyway. So, of course, won't be starting with the 79, but here's a look at some of my collection of prayer books, the majority of my collection. And what we'll be doing over the next several videos is beginning here with the 1549 and 1559 versions that are both in this paperback that I found not too long ago. It also has the text of the 1662, which is the next book we'll be looking at, and I have the Cambridge version here, as well as a very recent updated 1662 where they've corrected a few errors, updated the language, and actually put the rubrics in red, which I think is the only book I have to do so. After the 1662 Common Prayer Book, we will move to take a little side trip to that John Wesley book, which I suddenly don't have here, and take a little detour from the Episcopal Church tradition and detour into the Wesleyan side to look at how the prayer book was altered and eventually absorbed into Wesleyan and Methodist worship. Following that John Wesley version, we will come to the 1928 Common Prayer Book of the Episcopal Church in America, which is my preferred version. It's close enough to the 1662, but updated and with some corrections made for an American worshiper, as opposed to the 1662, which has its references to the monarchy in England. After the 1928, we will take a little look at the 1979 that I've already mentioned. Here's another version of that, the 1979 Episcopal Prayer Book. And then another kind of side detour to look at this lovely little Canadian Common Prayer Book, which also is has the hymns as well as the Common Prayer bound together. So that's just kind of a quick peek at what we'll be looking at over the next several videos, beginning today's kind of the kickoff as the first Sunday in Advent, and sometime this week I'll be releasing the first look, which will be the 1549 and 1559 versions. I also didn't mention the most current and most recent prayer book here at the bottom, the 2019 Anglican Church in North America revision. I don't know enough about this one yet, having just got it, so I'll have to bone up on that before we get to the point where I'm ready to release that video. So maybe you'll join me over the next few weeks to look at these prayer books a little more in depth, talk about the history of the prayer book, the structure of the prayer book, and the use of the Book of Common Prayer in church worship and in your personal daily worship and devotions. Thanks for joining me for this little preview, and I hope to see you next time.